Boker Tov, everyone. Back to Gemarah Sanhedrin. Although, to be honest, we're going to be doing more of Shmuel Bet than we are of Gemarah Sanhedrin because the two completely and utterly overlap. So, those of you, which I think is everybody apart from Julia, who's
I listen.
Listen. Okay, so Julia's in on it as well. So all of you who are listening to the recording here, who also listen to Shmuel Bet, you know what I'm going to say. It's all going to be spoiled for you because you know I like to keep you in suspense in Shmuel Bet. Well, you're going to hear all about it here. It's fascinating how it all overlaps, our learning overlaps, because this whole Gemara that we're about to do now is to do with exactly the psukim that we are up to in Shmuel Bet. As I said the other day, it's almost like a total eclipse of the sun where the two coincide absolutely perfectly. So it's very interesting. Does anybody remember the homework that I gave you last week? Even Julia can't remember the homework that I gave you last week. No?
Sorry, sir. Didn't do it. I definitely didn't do it.
Okay, you'll all have to have detention. Right. Well, the homework was this. Let's go to the screen and I'll show you the homework. We're on page 115 in yours and Michael and Johnny. It's Chaf Ahmed Aleph in the Big Boys Gemara. What have you got there, Leslie?
No, I was just looking at Shmuel Bet. So
okay. Okay, open Shmuel Bet to chapter 3 while you're there, and you might as well get it all ready. Okay. I'll be putting it on the screen in a minute anyway, but it's good if you've got it open. Right. So we spoke last week, if you remember, we had a fascinating discussion towards the end of the shir about how the minhagim of women going to funerals all developed, how it worked out in the United Synagogue shuls, how it worked out in the Haredi shuls, how it was in Leeds and Manchester and all those wonderful places, and Bushy. And that's what we spoke about last time. And I said to you that there is no source, at least not in our Gemara, for saying women can't go to funerals. In fact, the machloket that we have got here in our Gemara is not whether women should go to funerals or not. It's about whether women should go at the front of the coffin or the back of the coffin. So there isn't even what we call in the vernacular a havamina. A havamina means I might have thought. There isn't even a thought to say that women can't go. So Hannah mentioned last week that there was a lot of Kabbalistic stuff and perhaps Kabbalistic reasons why they don't go. But the Gemara is not having any of that for sure, because the Gemara clearly tells us that women go. The question is, where do they go, front or back? And we brought a proof that, well, let's do the Gemara. Let's go back over what we did right at the end, and then I'll tell you what the homework was, or you might even remember. Tanu Rabbanan. The Gemara says the rabbis taught us, Makom, in a place, shenagu nashim latzeit achar hamita, in a place where the women are accustomed to go behind the coffin, yotzaot, that's what they do. They go behind the coffin. Lifnei hamita, in the places where it's customary for them to go in front of the coffin, yotzaot, that's what they do. In other words, you go according to the custom of the place. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda,
do they go behind the coffin but in front of the men?
Okay, good question. Hold on to the question and you'll see the answer shortly.
Okay.
Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, La'olam, always, nashim lifnei hamita yotzaot. The women always go in front of the coffin, never behind. And then he brings a proof. Shekain matzinu b'David, because that, what do we find with David? Sheyatsa achar mitato shel Avner. David went behind the coffin of Avner. Shene'emar, and he quotes our pasuk that we did in Shmuel Bet on Sunday. V'hamelech David halach achar hamita. And the King David went after the coffin. Let's get up the Shmuel Aleph for you. Sorry, Shmuel Bet. There we go. Where is it? Bum, 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 bum. Which pasuk is it here? Hang on.
31.
31. Thank you. Thank you very much. Vayomer David el Yoav el kol ha'am asher ito karu bigdeihem v'chigru sakim v'siftu livnei Avner. Tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, and start wailing. V'hamelech David holech acharei hamita. And King David went after the mita, after the coffin. Now, the homework was Rabbi Yehuda uses that as a proof that the women go in front of the coffin. Why? How, in what way is that a proof that women go in front of the coffin?
Because King David was presumably with the men, and the men went after it. Said he followed it.
Correct, because there is an assumption, is there not, that the men and the women would not mingle. Okay, there's an assumption that the men and the women wouldn't mingle, which of course is why the super machmir people in the places like where we come from don't want women going to funerals, because they don't want them mingling with the men. Notwithstanding that the Gemarah says it's okay that one goes in front and one goes behind, here Rabbi Yehuda says it must be that the women go in front because David went after, meaning that he must have gone with the men, and therefore the women must be in front of the coffin. The coffin must divide, must be a dividing mechitzas, as it were, between the men and the women. Julia is not happy, and neither is Michael. We'll go to Julia first because she expressed her displeasure first. Go on, Julia.
Well, there's
Why?
no reason why you couldn't have an additional mechitzas after the men if you wanted a mechitzas. It didn't need to be the coffin that was. You could have had or a space between them. The men could have all gone together en masse, and then there could have been another barrier, or not, as the case may be, and the women could have followed.
Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda's proof's a bit flimsy. According to Julia, and she's obviously quite right, doesn't mean that they have to go in front. They could also go behind, but they could have gone behind, right? They've gone behind. So yeah, that's Rabbi Yehuda's not on particularly strong ground there. Michael, have you got another objection or the same one?
Exactly the same one.
Okay, so we're not overly impressed so far with Rabbi Yehuda. Let's see what the Gemarah has got to say about it. Amar lo, they said to him. Who said to who?
The Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda.
Yeah, the Chachamim, who that was the first opinion that said the women went after, or they go before or after, or whatever the minhag is. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is saying there is no minhag here. They all go in front. So the sages, the Chachamim, said to Rabbi Yehuda, nah, you can't bring me a proof from King David. And this is where you're going to get the spoiler for next Sunday. Lo haya hadavar ela lefayes et ha'am. King David was only going after the coffin and carrying on with himself and putting and wailing and all that stuff in order to appease the people. It was all a big show, says the Chachamim. David wasn't all that bothered about Avner. He just wanted to appease the people. Now, why did he need to appease the people? Let's go to the psukim. Let's go. Whoop, that's not what you want. Wait a minute. Let's go to the psukim.
In those days, Johnny, can I just say that with the messing around with men and women and this, that, and the other, were they so bothered about mechitzas?
Well, that's a very good question, Johnny. You will remember the late, great, and lamented Rabbi Moshe Kupitz, Zichrono Livracha.
Yes, yes.
And for those who didn't know him, he was a tremendous rabbi, born in America, in New York. He married the Manchester Rosh Yeshiva's daughter, Fagi, who must be cracking on a bit now. She must be well in her 90s. She's still alive.
Fagi is a bit older than me. She's about 85.
Nah, she's got to be. She was 85 about 25 years ago.
Eliakim would be called him. Is a year younger than me, I think.
Well, anyway, she seemed about 150 even then.
Okay, yeah.
She taught my kids, and she was really, really machmir on absolutely everything. She was well known as being the tznius police as well. Really, really machmir. And Rabbi Kupitz married her. And he was American, and of course, Americans, generally speaking, are larger than life, especially when they're outside of America. And he was a larger than life character, gave an absolutely brilliant shiurim. And in fact, you could argue that it's at least partially in his merit that we are here today. Because I think I've told you this before. I gave up learning Gemara for a long, long time because I had a lousy teacher when I was a kid. And I never opened the Gemara for many years after that. It was only when somebody persuaded me, arm up the back job, to go to Rabbi Kupitz's Gemara shir that I started learning Gemara again and started to enjoy it. So he was a great teacher and a very fine person. And he told me that at his wedding to Fagi, right, bearing in mind we're talking about Fagi Kupitz, the Fagi Siegel, the daughter of the Rosh Shiva, there was no mechitza. Not only that, he wore a brown suit. Exactly, David. I mean, shock, horror.
The next thing you'll tell me is they had mixed dancing.
Well, I don't know about that. I wasn't there. I certainly couldn't comment. I doubt it went that far. However, the point is made. So, Johnny, there's no question that in the last 50 years, maybe 30 years, 40 years, I don't know how long it is, certainly in where we come from, this Indian of mechitzas has accelerated and gone meshuggah. I remember going to school meetings about whatever it was about, and there's a mechitza there. No davening or anything. It's a school meeting about the uniform or whatever it was. Nonsense. I also remember going to a kiddush once in the depths of Broom Lane. For those of you who don't know, that's Hasidish world.
Separate houses.
The kiddush was in separate houses.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, fair enough. They didn't have a room, but they had a mechitza down the path. Right? They literally had put a rail with a sheet on it. They had a mechitza down the path. It's gone mental, this mechitza business. So did they have mechitzas back in the day at the time of the Gemarah? I doubt it, Johnny. And in fact, what we do know is that the only time that the women were separated from the men in the Bet HaMikdash was when? We're told specifically that they were separated at this particular time. Implication is that at other times they weren't. You know when that was?
When they were praying.
What'd you say, Hannah?
When they were praying?
Well, yes, maybe, but the Mishnah says specifically that they were separated at one particular time of the year.
Yeah.
Go on, David, tell us.
Simchas Beis HaShoeva.
Correct.
Yeah.
The Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the musical and frivolous entertainment that used to go on during Chol HaMoed Sukkot in the Bet Mikdash. And if you look in the Mishnah there in Masechet Sukkot, it tells you that if you've never seen the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you've never seen Simcha in your life. And it describes how the Chachamim, listen to this wouldn't happen in MH either. The Talmidei Chachamim, the big knacker rabbis, were doing juggling and were doing acrobatics. And in fact, only they were allowed to do the acrobatics, the Chachamim. You had to be a big Talmid Chacham to do that, not standing there, with your big covered on your shoulders. Anyway, so it says there that the women were on a gallery above, which is, by the way, the source for our minhag of having women in a gallery. Okay, but that was only on Simchat Beit HaShoeva. The implication is that the rest of the time, there's no mechitza. I'm not saying they all sat, mixed up with everybody else's wives and what have you, but there's no big deal made out of separating the women. Only on Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Why? Because when you're in that sort of frivolous sort of atmosphere, there's a risk that, hanky-panky might start taking place, and you've got to be extra careful. Whether you need that down the middle of a pathway on the way to a kiddush or at a school meeting about uniform is, as far as I'm concerned, a very moot point. So I'm glad you raised that, Johnny, because it happens to be a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I've got it off my chest now, and we can carry on. Right.
Can I say something?
Because in the previous chapter, sorry, Steinsaltz says presumably David didn't go amongst the women. That's why I was surprised.
Well, that's what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is. So, but we're going to see it's not quite the case. Go on, Hannah.
I just wanted to say, I've also got a bit of a hobby horse with this, in the sense that when I was a child in Melbourne, we had a kosher butcher, and my mother used to order kosher chickens, meat, whatever, once a week, and it was delivered. And she used to stand and kosher it at home, the chickens and the meat and whatever. When I went back to Melbourne, it must be about 20 years now, 15 years ago, we went to the kosher butcher to buy meat, and you could only get meat or chickens that had already been koshered. The rabbinate had decided that the butcher would only sell meat that had already been koshered. And I said, and I didn't understand why. So I was informed that they didn't trust the level of knowledge amongst the women or the people, the masses, that they would kosher it properly. So in order to prevent something bad happening and the people eating non-kosher food properly, that was the decision of the rabbinate in Melbourne. Now, it's basically on the presumption of it's a slippery slope. You start with a little bit and it goes on, and so you go the other way and you make things harder, and you make it harder for people to do the wrong thing. And I imagine that that's also the reason why this profusion of mechitzas has also come about, because they don't exactly trust the masses, and so we'll make sure that they don't do the wrong thing.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I want to talk about the kashering thing, and then I'll come back to the mechitzas. It's a very interesting point that you raised there, Hannah. The same thing occurred in England as well. I don't think that you can. Maybe you can. One sec, Julia. Maybe you can, in certain places in Stamford Hill or somewhere, still get unkashered meat. But certainly across the board, as far as I know, in the UK, you cannot buy meat from a butcher that is not already been kashered. Now,
there was a reason behind that, because I've spoken to the Beth Din or rather the department there, they did it to help everybody.
Absolutely.
It made life a lot easier for them. It was nothing to do with worried about what the women would do. It was to make their life easier.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
I used to kosher my chicken and my meat, and I was delighted when I didn't need to. It takes hours to do it. It's not a nice, pleasant job.
Particularly liver.
Okay,
liver's
separate. We'll talk about liver in a minute.
You can speak.
Koshering chickens is awful, and really awful.
So
it's a job the butcher should do.
Yeah,
okay.
But Leslie's brother was partly responsible for that as well.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything because, yeah, say no more.
So that's the positive side of it. There's certainly a positive. I mean, I think Hannah's point and Julia's point are both valid. I think that certainly it made it easier. I just about remember my grandmother kashering meat and kashering chickens. I don't remember my mother doing it, but I just about remember my grandmother doing it. So, I mean, I'm 65. So I reckon in Manchester, they stopped selling unkashered meat probably in the mid-60s, maybe a little bit later.
London
Definitely later.
I can tell you
when we first got married, we had to kasher meat, and I still remember Haredi Butcher opened in Edgware Kosher Butchers, and they were the first butchers in the area to sell ready kosher meat.
So that's interesting. It doesn't surprise me that London is backward compared to Manchester, but I can tell you for sure from the time when my memory is strong, so let's say 8-9 years old, my mother never kashered chickens. They were bought ready kashered, definitely. So I'm going to stick my neck out and say that ready kashered meat and ready kashered chickens were readily available. May not have been across the board, but were readily available by the late 60s, certainly by 1970. What's your experience, Johnny? Can you remember?
Yeah, I've just asked my wife. We've been married 1967. We got married. Linda said they started Halberstadt started selling kosher meat, kashered meat, about 7 or 8 months after we got married.
There you go. There you go. So that fits in with my recollection. That fits in perfectly with my recollection.
1968.
Yeah, I said late 60s. Yeah. So I think that's right. Of course, the Londoners, you know, what Manchester does today, London does tomorrow. And we don't even need to go to Liverpool or Leeds, you know. I mean, anyway, let's not go there. So for sure, it was a very, very positive thing, as Julia said. And if Leslie's brother was responsible for that, kol hakavod to him. But I do think that Hannah's point, which is what she was told about Melbourne, is definitely a point which is worth considering. And that is, but the problem with that, Hannah, is it's a double-edged sword, because if you were to ask any woman who is younger than us, let's say, how to kasher chickens and how to kasher meat, they wouldn't have a clue.
That's right.
And that's a problem.
It's not a problem. You can.
I agree with.
Well, it's a problem if you go to a place where the butchers don't do it for you. Now,
I think you can Google it and find out.
You can Google it. All right. Yeah, you go on. There's probably a YouTube video on it. It's true. But you know the point that I'm making. People become what's called de-skilled, and we see this in medicine a lot. You know, you find in my particular practice, I was the lead for diabetes. That was my thing. So all the diabetic patients came to me. There was another lead. Somebody else was the lead for asthma. So all the asthmatic patients went to him. So what that meant was that I got de-skilled in treating asthma patients, and everybody else got de-skilled in treating diabetic patients. If you don't use it, you lose it. So there is a bit of a problem with that. And when the double-edged sword is, yeah, it might be done properly, but those skills get lost. And of course, how did you learn how to do it, Julia?
Probably from reading Evelyn Rose, because I actually don't remember my mother doing it, but I'm sure she did. But I was at school when she must have done it.
Right.
Evelyn Rose is my.
Okay. I think if
yes,
I was to ask
go-to.
that question to most women, they would say they learnt it from their mothers
Mm.
or their grandmothers. Most people would, I think.
Johnny, going back to your skill set example, that was the reason that was given for stopping hind quarter meat in the UK, because it was felt by the Based in that the butchers had lost the skill of porging the meat.
Yes,
And
correct.
it was therefore banned.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. Now,
Can
I
I
just
make-
want to go back 1 second, Hannah. I just want to go back to the issue of liver, because there's a good example of how this fact that the butchers do it for us is problematic. And it's like this. As I said, in the late 60s, confirmed by Linda, in Manchester at least, butchers did all the cashiering, including liver. Right? So you bought your liver ready cashered. Anybody who bought liver here in Israel?
Yes.
Is it cashered?
Well, it was a long time ago that I bought it, and when I bought it, no, it wasn't
No.
covered.
Well, I can tell you that I don't know if there is any cashered liver here. I don't know. I've never seen it. And we buy liver, and my son-in-law buys kilos of the stuff, and it is all uncashered. Now, I remember as a teenager, the very first time that I came to Israel as a teenager, and it wasn't the first time I came to Israel, it's the first time I remember coming as a teenager with my parents. We rented an apartment on King David Street in just up north of the square there in Netanya. And I remember going with my father to the butcher's and buying the meat. And he asked the butcher whether the meat was ready cashered.
Mm.
Now, the meat was ready cashered. Now, my father knew enough to know that when he looked at the liver, that it was not ready cashered because it didn't look cashered. So in order to casher liver, you have to sear it. It has to be, seared with on an open flame. It has to be seared on an open flame. Now, my father knew that, but there would have been many, many, many people who will have gone into a butcher shop here in Israel, and that may still be the case today, that there are people who don't know that the liver that you buy here in your supermarket and in your butcher is not cashered. You have to casher it before you use it. And I will stick my neck out and say, I bet there are a ton of people here in Israel who are eating non-cashered liver, who are cooking their liver and it's not it's cashered because they think it's already cashered, because where they come from, they buy it ready cashered. And that is a problem. It is a big problem. So that's all about cashered. Hannah, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, but it's escaped me now.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it. Anyway, we digress. Oh, to the mechitzas. So yes, so Hannah's point is that in order so that we wouldn't get into problems with mixing and mingling, we make loads of mechitzas. That's absolutely true. That is why this, what did you say? It was a great expression. The proliferation of mechitzot has occurred. And the truth is that in certain circles, that for them is a problem. It's the same idea that you find. There was a situation that went on in Ramat Bet Shemesh some years ago, where there was a dreadful situation where a certain group of very extreme people were spitting at young girls aged 7 and 8 because they were going to school in their Dati Liumi school uniform, which wasn't to the liking of this particular group. And they were spitting at these children.
Not so long ago.
It's not so long ago. It's a few years ago. And there was a big hoo-ha about it. And I mean, the fact that it happened was disgraceful. But what was more disgraceful was the explanation of the person who was stopped and said, "Why did you do such a thing?" And they said, "Well, what do you expect? We're normal men. It's not right that these girls should be doing that. You know, we're going to be tempted into that's bloody paedophilia." The kids were 7 or 8 years old. If we have degenerated to a state where we need a mechitza down the middle of a path going to a kiddush, or a 7-year-old schoolgirl cannot walk to school in a normal school uniform without perverts needing to cover their eyes or something, then if that's the case, well, then we do need mechitzas. But it's a reflection.
It's worse than Iran.
Yeah, it's a reflection of the society, not a reflection of the halacha. So maybe that is the reason that it's proliferated, but it really oughtn't to. I don't know how we got onto that, and it's all a bit over the top for a Wednesday morning.
They had mechitzas in David's day. That's why.
Yes, that's your fault, Johnny. You set me off on a rant.
I knew I would.
Never. All the people who are going to listen to that who are tuning in to have a Gemarah share.
I knew I would. That's why we do it.
I've just been treated to a rant. Anyway, let's get back to business. We've still got half an hour. Right. So the question is, what was going on that the Gemarah says? Let's just go back to that Gemarah because we've forgotten what we were talking about. The Gemarah says, "Now you can't bring me a proof from King David. He only went out after the coffin, lefayes et ha'am, to appease the people." That's what it says here. And then I was just about to go into the Gemarah there.
The only thing is, the only problem with not using it is that even if he only went out to appease the people, he still would have gone out in accordance with the prevalent practice. He wouldn't have done something.
Let me stop you there, because the Gemarah is going to talk about that, and you'll see that actually what you're saying is not correct. Okay, the Gemarah is going to explain it, but we'll come to it. Let's look at the screen. This is the pasuk in Shmuel Bet, right? V'chol ha'am hikiru, all the people recognized. V'yetav b'einehem, and it was good in their eyes. K'chol asher asa ha'melech b'einei kol ha'am tov, and it was pleasing in the eyes of what the king did. Next verse, Vayedu chol ha'am, all the people knew, v'chol Yisrael b'yamahu, and all Israel on that day, ki lo hayta mehamelech lahamit et Avner ben Ner, that it wasn't the king's fault that Avner was killed. So the Gemarah is saying that, look at the psukim. The psukim are telling us that David was the ultimate politician. He went out amongst the people crying about Avner, not because he cared about Avner, but because he wanted to demonstrate that it wasn't him that killed him. And what does the Gemarah actually say? The next word in the Gemarah, v'nitpaisu, and indeed they were appeased. It worked. It worked brilliantly. Because what might have happened was the people who would get upset about Avner's death. Which people would be upset about Avner's death?
Binyamin.
So Binyamin see that somebody's killed Avner. They think it's come from David, whether he did it himself or David's chief of staff, Yoav, did it, doesn't matter. It came from David. What are they going to say? We're not having him as our king. He's our enemy. And what was David trying to do at this point? He was trying to unite the two kingdoms. It was absolutely vital that he had the people on side. And so the fact that he went out after the funeral and was crying over Avner was to demonstrate that he did not kill Avner. It wasn't my fault, Gov, right? That's what he's trying to tell the people, and it worked. And so the rabbi said to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't give me any kind of proof that David went out after the coffin, and therefore the women must go in the front, because he only went out to appease them. And look what it says next, Hannah. Shehaya David yotze mi bein ha'anashim. David would go amongst the men, v'nichnas lebein anashim, and then he went amongst the women. Shock, horror, right? No mechitza. He's there.
No, that doesn't mean there's no mechitza, because it separates the two.
All right, so he's gone on the women's side. Shock, horror.
Yeah.
Right? Shock, horror. The king's on the women's side here. So he's gone amongst the men and the women. V'yatza mi bein anashim. And then he went out from the women, v'nichnas lebein anashim, and then he went to the men. So what's he doing? He's pressing flesh, right? He's doing the royal walkabout, kissing babies, taking poses of flowers, and, you know, being generally populist. That's what he's doing. He's going amongst his people. So he's amongst the men and he's amongst the women. So says the Gemarah, says the Chachamim to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't bring me a proof from this pasuk, because this was not normal. And then he quotes, the Gemarah quotes the end of the pasuk, which I just quoted for you. Vayedu kol ha'am v'chol Yisrael ki lo hayta me'amelech lahamit et Avner. The people all knew that David did not kill Avner.
Question.
Yes, Julia. One second,
Question.
Julia was about to ask me something I could see on
No,
the
I wasn't, other than I keep wondering, well, did he travel then to Benjamin? Is that where, or was Avner buried where he was killed, which was in Hebron?
Well, where was he killed? Can anybody remember where he was killed?
Wasn't he killed in Hebron, because he was called back?
Just outside
called him
Hebron.
back.
Yeah, let's just have a look at the psukim. Where are we? Hang on.
No, it
close
wasn't
to
Hebron,
Hebron.
it was another place.
Okay, so he called Yoav.
They buried him in Hebron.
Yoav called him aside. Remember?
Mhm.
Yoav and Avishai. Where are we? A bit earlier on. And Yoav and all the army which with him came and told Yoav, Yoav, what have you done? Yoav departed from David and sent messengers after Avner and brought him back to this place, Mibor Hasirah. Mibor Hasirah. Remember, I tried to find out where that was. Remember, I spoke about it on Sunday. It's some Arab village just north of Hebron. And Avner returned to Hebron. He came back to Hebron. And where did it happen? He caused him to turn aside unwittingly into the midst of the gate. He called him aside to a place there, and he stabbed him under the fifth rib. Remember, I showed you that lovely picture, that AI model of the rib cage there. So it would seem that he was buried probably. Well, I don't know. It doesn't say where he was buried, does it? Oh, it does. Verse 32. Verse 32, it says it clearly. Yeah, they buried him in Hebron.
Yeah.
They buried him in Hebron. So this is going on in Hebron. But presumably, Julia, Avner's supporters would have been there. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that he was appeasing the people. You have to say that Binyamin, and it says, in fact, in verse 37, and it actually, we'll talk about this on Sunday. There is an expression here, kol ha'am. Let's do it now, and then we'll go over it on Sunday. Can you see this expression, kol ha'am, there? Yeah? All the people. Let's count up how many times the expression kol ha'am is. So there's one. There's two.
There's one above that, Johnny. Lamed Bet. Lamed Bet. Yeah.
Yes, there's one there. Okay, that's three. Oh, there's another one there. Four. Right. So from there, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4,
5,
5,
6,
6,
7.
7. There you go. How many times does it say Kol Ha'am?
At least 7.
7. 7's an important number, isn't it? 7 has got a great importance to it. 7 times it says Kol Ha'am. What's that telling us? It's telling us that this was done for a purpose, to get Kol Ha'am on board. So your point, Julia, is a very good point. Because if this is all going on in Hebron, the real people that he needs to impress might not have been there. They may have been up in Binyamin, unless you say they've come for the Leviah. Maybe that's the story. Yes, Hannah.
Can I interrupt? The question I was going to ask was back in the Gemarah. I don't have the Chumash where it says, where it says, וידעו כל העם וכל ישראל כי לא הייתה למלך. He didn't have anything to do. And I wanted to ask, why did it write in the Gemarah, Kol Ha'am v'Chol Yisrael? Thank you.
Okay.
And I think while you were talking and everything, the thought came up that maybe Kol Ha'am refers to Benjamin, and Kol Yisrael is the part that what is all the rest is the part that became the northern tribes of Israel eventually.
Maybe. I thought slightly different. I thought Kol Ha'am would be Yehuda, David's folk, and Kol Yisrael would be the rest. But you may be right. But there's a distinction. You're quite right to point it out. It's on the screen for you now. It's in Pasuk Lamed Zayin. There is a distinction between Kol Ha'am and Kol Yisrael. Why do we need to be told both? Because they're obviously two different sections of people. Whether you say it's Yehuda and Binyamin, or Yehuda and the rest of Israel, or whether you say it's Binyamin and the rest of Israel, there's clearly a distinction. Yes, Michael Kraus.
Okay, two points going back a little way. The first one, I find it very strange that Avner, when he came to see David, he had no protection. He was the chief of staff. I would have thought he had a number of troops, so therefore I can't see how Yoav could have got to him so easily. And the second point, which is not quite there, is that it says David went among the women. That must have been very unusual.
Why do you say that?
Because he said he went from the men to the women, which implied the men and women were totally separate. And he, as an individual, went into the women. Therefore, that would be unusual.
Maybe it's only unusual to us because we're so used to this proliferation of mechitzas.
Yeah, but they said they were separate. They said the men and women was effectively the men from the men to the women implies they're totally separate there. But he went across.
If you ever sat in the women's gallery, you would know that there's always odd men that think it's fine to go upstairs.
Yeah, and I don't know, somehow or other, whenever I go to a wedding where there's a mechitzah, I don't know how it happens. I always seem to find myself on the women's side of the mechitzah. I can't really explain it. It's one of those sort of. But let's go back to your first point. Avner, you say, must have come with some protection. Now, have a look on the screen at verse 20, please. Vayavo Avner el David Chevron, and Avner came to David in Hebron, ve'ito, and with him, Esrim Anashim, were 20 men.
So how did Yoav get to him when he had 20?
Whoa. Slowly. So you were right. He came with 20 men. What's the significance, by the way, of 20? I forgot to say this when we learned the Shmuel bet, but you've reminded me. What's the significance of those 20 men?
2 minyanim.
That is true.
One short of the Sanhedrin, 21.
23 in the Sanhedrin.
23, 3 short then.
Okay, let's go back a bit. Let's go back a bit into the previous chapter. Now, what happened in the previous chapter, guys? There was a war, was there not, between Avner's lot and David's lot. And let's have a look and see. Let's have a look and see what happened. There we go. Have a look at verse 30, please. And Joab returned after Avner and gathered all the people, and there were missing of David's servants 19 men and Asahel. So how many men were David's were killed?
20.
20. And so when Avner comes in the next chapter, in verse 20, he brings with him 20 men. And so what does he do with those 20 soldiers, Michael Kraus?
No idea.
He gives them to David as a replacement for the 20 soldiers that he, Avner, was responsible for their deaths in that battle. So your question was an excellent question, and we have an even better answer. Okay, so 20 men came with Avner, but then when Avner went from David's presence back to Binyamin, or we never got there, did he? Because Joab did him in on the way. But he went on the way to Binyamin to get the people on board for David. He went without those 20 men, because those 20 men had been forced into service into David's army as a replacement and as a peace offering by Avner to David to say, this is my proof that I have now crossed over to your side. The 20 men that were killed in the battle, I'm replacing with my 20 men. It was a gesture, and I meant to talk about this when we did this particular bit, and I forgot. So I'm glad you raised this, as it reminded me. So it was a gesture of Avner, of loyalty to David, of proof of his changing sides. And of course, there was no need for him to have bodyguards when he left David, because they were all big friends again. And if you look, it says very clearly on several occasions, Avner went off in peace, b'shalom. Okay, so there it is in verse 21, Vayelech b'shalom, which is, by the way, another, when you say to somebody, if they're going on a journey, go in peace, how do you say it?
Lech l'shalom.
Lech l'shalom. How do you not say it?
Lech b'shalom.
You don't say lech b'shalom, which is go in peace. Why not?
Because it suggests you're already going to be dead, isn't it, or something? When
Yeah. That's what you say to a dead person, lech b'shalom. And it comes from here. Because what did David say to Avner? Lech b'shalom, go in
And
peace.
then he died.
And what happened? He never went in peace. He never got there. He got there in pieces, right? So you don't say to somebody lech b'shalom. You say to somebody lech l'shalom.
Maybe David was actually saying, "Go to Joab. You've got my permission to kill him," by making that statement.
Well, I suppose it depends, chicken and egg, isn't it, Michael? Which where it came from. So
it ended up in pieces.
He ended up in pieces, correct. How did we get onto that? We got onto that from Michael Krause's question about how did Joab kill Avner? Well, Avner was on his own. He had no bodyguards. He'd already handed him over to David.
But he wasn't even suspicious.
No, he wasn't suspicious at all. Why should he be suspicious?
Yeah.
I mean, he should have been suspicious because he'd killed Joab's brother. It was perhaps a bit naive of him not to be suspicious. He'd killed Asahel, hadn't he? But you're right, he wasn't suspicious. Okay, let's go back to the Gemarah. We're making very, very good progress here. So King David's in and out of the men and the women here, and it works. The whole people were convinced that he did not kill Avner. Now, we've not finished yet. We've not finished because we have another pasuk in our chapter, which Rava is going to interpret homiletically, right? What's homiletically mean? Nothing to do with Hermolis meals. Homiletically means drush. Okay, it means it's not the simple explanation. It means it's an explanation which is poetic or has got some kind of hidden meaning, if you like. The verse he's referring to is a couple of verses later in Shmuel Bet chapter 3. Let's go back to that and look. It's in, there we go. So remember they buried Avner, and David goes after the coffin in verse 31, and we're going to talk about this on Sunday, King's Lament, Vayikonein Hamelech, same word as, where do you know that word from? Vayikonein Hamelech El Avner, the king lamented Avner. Where do you know that word from?
From Kinot.
Kinot, correct. Kinot. Lamentations is Eicha. It's Lamentations, the book of Lamentations, Eicha. But actually, Eicha doesn't mean lamentation. What does it mean?
How?
How, correct. How means how could it possibly be? Oives mea, right? So it is a lamentation, but the word doesn't mean lamentation. The word for lamentation is kina, and plural, kinot. Yes. So you have your kinot sefer, your book of kinot. So when David laments Avner, we're going to talk about this in detail on Sunday. We will see actually that this Gemarah and the shir on Sunday, they are absolutely complementary. So we can't really do one without the other. But what we find is after he's done all that wailing and lamenting, he comes back, and we said it before, I think maybe in last week's Gemarah shir. What's all this about with David acting like he's in mourning? He's not a relative of Avner's. What? But he's acting as if he is. Remember, we said that a Talmid Chacham, you can sit shiva for and tear your clothes for and all that stuff, yeah? And what does somebody who is a mourner, who comes back from the Levaya, what do his friends do for him?
Give him
make the meal.
Give him the breakfast.
Yeah. We went through all of that last week, didn't we? They give him a healing meal, which is how we're going to translate it. Sudat Havra'ah. They give him a healing meal. Now look at verse 35, please. Vayavo kol ha'am, and all the people came lehavrot et David lechem ba'od yom, to feed David this healing bread. In other words, his bagel and egg, right? Ba'od yom, while it was still day, right? So he is acting, David, like what?
Like an Avel.
Yeah, like a proper Avel. He's acting like a proper mourner. Now, we've just said, haven't we? It's all a bit of a con, this. This whole going amongst the people business was only to appease him. He doesn't really feel like he's an Avel, but he's going through the motions, isn't he? He's really taking on the role here. And you can't fault his, his politics. He's doing a great job. But the people have bought it, haven't they? They come and they bring him this Sudat Havra'ah. And now the Gemarah is going to talk about this expression that we've just read here, Vayavo kol ha'am lehavrot et David, that is the causative form of the word. Okay, lehavrot means to cause somebody else to heal. Okay, so let's just have a look at this word lehavrot.
The footnote at the bottom of the page on that, Johnny.
Footnote in the bottom of this page, or the Gemarah?
Rob Stein's house.
Okay, let me look at that, because it's probably what I haven't looked at the footnotes. It's probably going to be what I'm going to talk about. Yes, it is. Don't look at that. Don't spoil it. Okay. So if you have a look at this word lehavrot, okay, which I've highlighted there, I'm going to try and put it on a Word document. Wait a minute. How can I do that? New document. Let me show you this in a minute. Hang on. I just want to highlight it and make it bigger. Right. Let me change that screen for you now. Not sure what screen you can see now. What can you see at the moment?
The word lehavrot.
Just that word in big, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so it worked. Now, look at that letter there, that bet. What letter in the Hebrew alphabet is very similar in shape to a vet? Go on, Julia.
Oh.
A calf. Yes, a calf, or a cough, as we used to call it back in the day, right? A calf. Now, if you change that bet to a calf, all you really need to do is chop off that little doobry there at the side, isn't it? Take that bit off, and it becomes a calf. What does it say if that letter is a calf? Lehachrot. What does that mean? What's the root of the word lehachrot?
Karet.
Karet, meaning?
To cut off.
To cut off. Correct. I have just put in a bakasha to the Iriyah. I've just put in a request to the Iriyah. Lehachrot et ha'etz sheli. I have just put in a bakasha to cut down one of my trees. Okay, because it's causing problems with the drains. Lehachrot means to cut down. Now then, the footnote in the Steinsaltz Gemarah will explain to us. Let's go to that footnote here. Many commentaries point out that in the biblical texts, both the written and oral traditions to read this as lahavrot, meaning to comfort or revive with the meal of comfort. Some grammarians explain that actually there were more ancient versions in which it was written lehachrot, to destroy or to eliminate. It was originally a kri uktiv. You know what that is? A kri uktiv. Leslie, we spoke about this in shul a few weeks ago. You asked me a question. Do you remember? About something that was written one way and read in a different way.
Yes.
Remember that, Leslie?
Yes.
Well, this is one of those examples.
Yes.
In some old texts of Tanakh, the Gemarah, the Tanakh does not say Vayavo kol ha'am lehavrot. It's written lehachrot. And it's read lehavrot. Now, in our versions, if you like, modern versions, however modern that is, a couple of thousand years, be very interesting actually to look. I need to look it up. I've just thought of this. Be very interesting to see what it says in the Dead Sea Scrolls, wouldn't it? Dead Sea Scrolls has a copy of Shmuel. It will be very interesting to see whether in Shmuel it's written in the Dead Sea Scrolls version. Need to make that's my homework for this week. To write it down. Dead Sea Scrolls, Le Hachrot, or Le Havrot. Okay, I need to look that up. But there is, it seems there are ancient texts of Tanakh that say that this was written La Hachrot, and that ain't, well, let's look at the Gemarah. Let's look at the Gemarah. Where are we? Here we go. So, Darash Rava interprets this verse homiletically. What does it say? Vayavo kolaham lahavrot et David. The people came to feed this comforting meal to David. Tiv lahachrot. It's written lahachrot. V'karinon lahavrot. But we read it lahavrot. Batachila, in the first place, lahachroto. Initially, the people came not to feed him a meal which would heal him, but what? To cut him down, to kill him, right? Ula basof, and in the end, in brackets, after David's done a jobby on them, right? La havroto, they came to comfort him. They were convinced, and that is the explanation of Rava of that pasuk La Havrot. Initially, it was La Hachrot. The people came to kill him. But after he had gone out into the people between the men and the women and crying and veining and sitting on the floor and all that business, right? They were convinced that he didn't want to kill Avner and it wasn't his fault. And therefore, they changed the kaf to a vet.
They weren't convinced until the Shiva, until they saw him sitting down and the Shiva.
But by the end of his performance,
yeah,
and it looks like they did a good job because he saved his own life, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because they were going to kill him. Huh?
Got an Oscar for it.
Yeah, he got an Oscar for it. Well, he saved his life. better than an Oscar. So this is a fascinating story, fascinating piece of Gemarah. Doesn't exactly shine wonderful light on David, but we don't believe in saints. We only believe in human beings who make mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes as well as their good things. Right, we're well over time, but that's all Johnny Halpin's fault for winding me up about the mechitzas. Any questions on today's rant or even any of today's Gemarah? No, right, okay. In that case,
if you stop the recording,
I'll stop the